my house. Yeah, that's good. Pet peeves are funny. I love this about pet peeves too. There's some people that you have pet peeves with where it's so dominant that you just don't spend time with them. You know what I mean? Like you like them and no, you don't. You really don't like them. Let's just be honest. You don't like them. So you don't hang out with them. And then there's people, this too, that you're like, now you're in the relationship with. Like you're married to them or you're best friends with them. And I was thinking about this week. Isn't it funny, though, that there are some relationships that we have that you can overcome the pet peeveness, or however you'd say that, the pet peevery. Sorry, that was fun to say. The pet peevery, or whatever it is. And you can still be in a relationship. There are parts of them that drive you absolutely insane, but you figured out a way to still have a great relationship in the midst of it, right? There's a piece of you that has a friend like that. Maybe you're dating somebody like that. Maybe you're a spouse like that. Some of you have a boss like this. There are things that they do that drive you nuts, but you still choose to be at that place. Like you have all of these sorts of things. And at the end of the day, there's a piece of you that still wants to have a great relationship. Like you want to have a great relationship with the people that you're in relationship with. But at the end of the day, there's pieces of it that just make it really difficult. And where we started last week, and this is where we kicked off our series, we started with this principle, and that's this, that the God of the universe, I really believe this, if you look through the New Testament, you look through the writings of Scripture, he wants people to have great relationships. At the end of the day, there is a trajectory or a pull towards our own struggle in relationships. But at the end of the day, I think God wants us to have great relationships with each other. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It doesn't mean there's not going to be hard things. It certainly doesn't mean that people won't pop their knuckles, even though they should. Now I can't do it. Now I was going to, there goes. Oh, now I just feel guilty about it. Sorry, that's pretty much, please like me. But anyway, no, that's good. But there's a piece of you that go like, can we overcome those things? But God wants you to have these great relationships. And so last week we talked about this, and we ended with this question. We said, all the expectations that we put on other people, are we putting those same expectations on ourselves? And we said that when it comes to our relationships and our friendships and our marriages, all these sorts of things, we said, are you the person that you really secretly wish that other people to be? Like, do you hold the same values? Do you hold yourself to those same standards? And so that's where we talked about last week. Now, today what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of a step further, and I'll tell you this. For those of you who are in the room that are followers of Jesus, I'm going to tell you a little bit of the trajectory that we're going. What we're going to do is I'm going to say a few things that everybody's going to agree with. And then about midway through, I'm going to say one thing that's going to frustrate you to no end. You might walk out, but you're certainly going to be a little bit angry. And that's okay. It's emily.holden@nuvochurch.org. That's who you email it to. I'm just kidding. And there's that sort of thing. But we're going to feel that. And then there's going to be a part of this, too, that I'll tell you, if you're not a follower of Jesus, a section of this message as I talk about this, it will feel like I'm looking at you and saying, hey, you don't think I can do this on my own. And you would be absolutely right. That is exactly what I'm saying. I think you can be good at this, but I don't know that you'll be who you could be without Jesus. And so we'll take a time there. And then I'll say one last thing. For the entirety of the message today, because you're a good person, because in general you do good things, because you're good in your friendships, all these kinds of things, I'll just tell you this. For the entirety of the message, there's going to be a part of you that goes, I'm already pretty good at this. And so let me just affirm that in you right off the gate. You're already good at this. And I don't care about that. I don't care that you're good at it. I want you to be great at it. Right? I want you to be great. And I want you to be better at it than you are, no matter where you are on this. But there's a piece of us that goes, I'm already pretty good at it. And so what we do, and by we, I mean especially me, is I will romanticize the areas that I'm not good at it and convince myself I'm probably better at this than I actually am. So here's what I'm going to tell you. For the section of the talk where you go, hey, I'm already pretty good at this. This is for somebody else. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do. This is going to be fun. You only have to do it for the next few minutes. Is I'm going to ask you to remind yourself of all the times that you're bad at it, at least for the next few minutes, so that you can feel good about yourself while I speak. That'll be great. I'm half kidding, but I do want you to think about that. And because when it comes to what we're going to talk about today, this is something that everybody, I think, can grow in, and it's one of those things that we just tend to overlook just a little bit. Now, the phrase that I grew up with a lot when it came to my relationship is this. And when it comes to your relationships, you're going to work hard at the relationship, right? I remember being told this when we did premarital counseling. Premarital counseling, how many of you did premarital counseling? Anybody do premarital counseling? So we did it. It was interesting. We did premarital counseling, and we had, I think I can say this. I'll just tell you. It was me and Emily. We'd been together for about 7.5 to 8 years. So we knew each other, I would say, pretty well at that point. And then we had two couples that were like doing premarital. One of them had never done it before, so we were like their first group. And then one of them had been doing it for about 93 years. I don't know. They've been doing it a long time. And so what they would do is they would sit on stools. I want you to picture this, like high top stools, like 4 of them. And then we sat on their couch. So we were like super low and they were like super high. It kind of felt like Hunger Games-ish. I don't know. Like it felt like this. And then midway through this, it was always kind of funny. They had me, they wanted us to like embrace Song of Solomon, if you know what that is. Anybody ever read that? Every 13-year-old kid that grew up in church read that, boy at least. And so Song of Solomon, but they would have me read Song of Solomon to my wife, and I was like, y'all don't know what the imagery means, but I do because I went to school for this, and this is awkward. So there was a little bit of that. So it was a really weird experience. And one of the things that they kept saying that bothered me to no end is they say, your first year of marriage is going to be so hard, you're going to have to keep working at the relationship. And I'm like, I know it's going to be hard and we're going to learn things about each other. We've been doing this for a long time. And I was like, the idea of working at a relationship felt odd to me, and it always felt odd to me. And what's hard about that is if I'm working at something, I'm usually looking at the problems in it and trying to just fix either myself or you. And by that, I mean you. You know what I mean? There's a little bit of that. I'm working at the relationship, meaning I'm working on you. That's kind of what it felt like. And I'll never forget in that season, we would get in the car and we would drive away and we just kind of laugh going at times like, I don't think we're working at it like that. That wasn't our goal. And somebody gave me a phrase during that season that was so much more helpful to me. And they said, you're not working just at it. What you're doing is you're always going to be working for it. You're working for the relationship that you have with the other person. And it totally changed the trajectory of at least how we thought about this. For us, we were going, rather than just working at something, we're always going to be working for the benefit of both the relationship and the other person. And the thing that it shaped the most for me was my expectations in my marriage. Now, you know what expectations mean, so I shouldn't have to define it, but just so that we're kind of all on the same page, at least is how we're going to talk about it. Expectations are like this strong belief that something will happen or be the case in the future. Right? There's a piece of this where you look out and you go, when I think about you and what you're going to do, I expect you to do this. I have these expectations in a relationship. And what's interesting about this is very rarely do we think about all that goes into our own internal expectations, right? But your expectations of other people aren't just shaped by what you dream up. They're really shaped a lot of times by our past experience. You know this, for the first fight that you have ever got in with your spouse or a friend, you know this. You didn't come to that emotionally neutral, right? How many of you grew up in homes where like yelling was a part of your household? I did. That was a thing. How many of you grew up in like slightly passive, and by slightly we mean very passive aggressive homes? Anybody do this? Like you just Zorro'd each other with words. You know what I mean? Like it was a little bit of that. Sorry, Zorro was a masked swordsman, and I just people didn't know what Zorro was last time. Right. So there's a little bit of that where you go like, it's not emotionally neutral. You come to it with past experience. And that past experience shapes how you're going to view it. The other one is your current reality, and you know this too. Your current reality is kind of ups and downs. You're always viewing the world a little bit differently with more stress or less stress. There's all sorts of things that you view in your current reality. And that's always shifting and changing. And then the other one that you're bringing to all of your expectations is your future hopes and your future dreams. And these may be expressed or not. These may be dreams that feel like they failed, but that's a part of how you view the world and you view the relationship. And you're bringing all of these things into whatever relationship that you're in. Friendship, leadership, you're bringing this into your marriage, dating relationships, all of these things come into this. And so I put in my notes and said it this way. So my expectation of you is always going to be shaped by my point of view that I'm carrying all of these things into it with, right? Now, they might be good expectations, right? This is true. Like you might have really healthy expectations for a relationship or a friendship. The things that you might want may be really great. All of these things may be good, but they're not neutral. They're never neutral. You are bringing yourself, both the positives, the highs, and the lows, everything in between to this. And then what happens for most of us is that the other person, to whatever degree, doesn't meet our expectations. And it creates an immediate, it doesn't take long. It's in seconds. There's an expectation gap in those moments between what you thought could and should happen and what actually happened. And then when that happens, what most of us do, and you don't say this out loud, you don't look at the person and say this most of the time, but what happens is there's a moment where they owe you now. Right? They owe you something in the relationship, that I had this expectation of you and you didn't meet it, and so you owe me what you didn't give me, right? Now, this is probably a slightly cheesy example, but I'll give you an example of this. I grew up in a home with just me and my mom, and when I got to be a senior in high school, my mom moved, and so I had our whole house to ourselves for most of the week, right? Which would be really cool if I was popular. But anyway, I wasn't. So there's a piece of this where I was like, my mom trusted me in 95% of the areas. The one place that she didn't trust me in, I know this is going to sound kind of lame, from the time that I was, I think 10 or 11 years old, I had one chore in our house. Do you guys do chores? The kids have one chore. My one chore was to take out the trash. And over the course of 10, 11 years old to, I was like 18 or 19 at this time, I just never did it. It wasn't like a little bit didn't do it. Like it was just like I didn't do my one chore. And she tried all sorts of things, like all sorts of whatever. I just never did it. And so when she set me down, I always thought this was so funny. When she set me down to say, hey, like here's our rules for the house. Here's what you're going to do. The only thing she told me was, I'm going to need you to take out the trash. And I remember thinking to myself, I was like, I've created such an expectation gap in you that you're leaving an 18-year-old in a fairly nice house in a decent neighborhood and at this time in his life, and you're not going to be there. And you didn't ask me to not have parties. You were very confident about that. You didn't ask me to not do dumb things. The only thing that you thought about was the thing that I had built over time an expectation gap in, which was taking out the trash. And so she tried, and I still didn't take out the trash. But anyway, that was the whole thing. And I thought about this. I was like, it was a slow gap created over time. And over time, as that gap was created, there was a moment where I was like, there was distrust, there was pain, there was a gap in this. And even though it was tiny, like really tiny, it just continued to grow. And in every relationship that I have, there is some version of an expectation gap that exists. And it's not expectations that shouldn't exist. Sometimes they should. But there's something that gets lost along the way. And when there's expectation gaps that grow, what tends to happen is what you lose, at least in that area of it, is gratitude. You stop being thankful for the things that people drop the ball on over time, right? I'll say it like this, right? You and your spouse or your husband, you have a great relationship. It's fantastic. But there is something in many of us that when we've just finally expected them to do something, we stop saying thank you for things that we've just expected them to do, right? We stopped doing that. I love this quote. Andy Stanley says it like this. I love this quote by him. He says, most people express minimal or no gratitude for what they expect other people to do. And the more that I thought about this, I was like, more times than not, there's a gap in the relationship that even when it gets done, you're just like, well, you should have done it anyway. You know what I mean? You should have cleaned out the dishes thing anyway. You should have done that anyway. There's a gap that happens there. And over time, that loss of gratitude somehow creates a level of resentment, or more specifically, distance in the relationship. And so I'll tell you, what we're going to talk about today is one of these things that I think is, it's going to feel small. And it's going to feel small in the beginning because you're probably pretty good at it. And you're probably pretty responsible. But it's going to feel small in the beginning. And then as we progress through it, I think there's a principle that's found in Scripture that kind of turns all of it on its head. And so the passage we're going to look at today is in John chapter 13. It's fun to think about because Jesus was a rabbi as he was living his life here. He spent a lot of years in obscurity, and then he came on the scene. And the very beginning part of it was still obscurity. And then he started healing people. And I wish I could figure out a better way to say this. I don't. He was healing people, and everybody started showing up. Right? When you start doing miraculous things, people start coming around. Whether you agree that he was the Son of God or not, what happened is he started doing miraculous things. People started showing up, and he started teaching in subversive ways. And now you show up to see him heal people and do extraordinary things. And then on the other side of it, you see him say subversive things that really frustrate all the people who kept the list, right? All the people who did all the check boxes. I honest to God, I would have probably shown up to see Jesus teach just to watch him frustrate that group of people and to see what he was going to do do next? And people just came to see this. And then on top of that, you don't like to think of Jesus this way, but this is also true. Jesus traveled with people who was almost like a posse, you know what I mean? Like you watch celebrities now, like you never see Taylor Swift by herself, right? You ever seen this? Like there were people that are always, they're just security guys. Did you guys see the video of Taylor Swift with a security guard who was like all over the place? Just me? Great, you should be on TikTok. Anyway, so there's a little bit of this, and I just laugh like she's not going anywhere just by herself. There's a ton of people with her. And what's funny about this is nobody really talks about it this way, but when Jesus traveled, he wasn't traveling really by himself. He had 12 people that had signed up to be like around him, but not just be around him. They wanted to be like him. Like being a disciple of a rabbi meant that you weren't just like in awe of them. It wasn't even that. It was like, I don't want to just like be around you. I want to be like you. I want to know all that you're doing. We've talked about like the dust of the rabbi thing. I want to follow you so close that as your feet kick up dust, it gets on my clothing. Like there's a little bit of that. They wanted to be like Jesus. And so there was a component of this, no matter, how humble he was, no matter what he would have done, that there was a slight elevation, right? When hundreds of people show up to hear you say words, or thousands of people as Jesus was teaching these things, for sure. As all of these people waited for him to do these sorts of things, there was a natural component to this. When there were 12 people following you that closely, and you have that much influence, there was a natural component to this. And so we have this beautiful picture of Jesus being at a meal with these close followers of him. And this is what happens in John chapter 13. It says this. It says, Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, meaning this, that this is a beautiful theological idea, but it wasn't like, oops, I might be the Son of God. That wasn't what happened. He knew who he was, and he knew what he was here to do. He knew the power that he held. He knew what he could do, and also what he was being led to do. Like these weren't like, I'm not sure about. He knew. He knew the power that he had, and he was under God's power. And he says, and that he came from God and was returning to God. He knew the story. We believe this. He knew the story. He knew what was to come. He knew all of this ahead of time. And he's at this meal with these people who were his disciples or close followers of him. And at this meal, if you're sitting there, he was the one who had the power and the influence and the one that you would naturally just elevate in these moments. And what happens next is so beautiful and so powerful. It goes on, it says this. It says, so he gets up from the meal, gets up from the table. He takes off his outer clothing and he wraps a towel around his waist, which I want you to picture this as best you can. I wish we could picture it in an easier way, but Jesus is there with these people who have expressed, I want to not just be around you, but I want to be like you. I want to be you. I want to move in the world as you do. And Jesus gets up from the meal, from the position of power and authority and influence. And he takes off sort of the top piece of this robe, and he grabs a towel. And it says after that, he pours water into a basin, and he began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with a towel that was wrapped around him. Now, this is a little bit hard for us to probably wrap our heads around because I don't know that you've ever showed up to the office and to be a servant to your coworker said, can you please remove your shoes? You've never done that. That would be your last day working at that job. That would just get real weird real fast. You don't wash people's feet, right? You just don't do it. And in this culture, this wasn't just a sign of significance. This is actually a practical thing. You walked around in some version of a shoe that would get dusty and get, these weren't pretty feet, right? These were, it was nasty. It just was. There's a piece of this where you go, what he does is he takes the lowest position in this moment amongst this group of people to do something to serve them. This is like your boss showing up at your house and you're like, I'm gonna feed you. He's like, no, let me cook and you just relax. You're like, no, I'm gonna need you to get out of my kitchen. There's a little bit of that. There's a little bit about the least expected person to serve in this way serves in a massive way. And what his followers or one of his followers says, and I think this is so great, he goes, no, why are you washing our feet? He's like, we should be the one that washes your feet. Why? Because it's you. Because you're Jesus, because we believe these things about you, because we're following you, all these sorts of things. And what Jesus responds to them with is like, if you don't grasp what's happening here, and you don't see what's going on here, you're going to miss the kingdom, this new kingdom that's in the world. you're going to miss what I'm doing here. When all the expectations around Jesus were that he would come with his power and military strength and free this group of people from the oppression that they were in and come in a very different way that he comes, Jesus chooses humility with this group of people. And he picks up the towel. He doesn't sit in a tower, right? He doesn't lord it over them in these ways. He comes with a towel and washes his disciples' feet. Which, I'll just be really honest, the skeptic in me and the skeptic in you goes, that sounds like a really good Christian movie that would be shown on Hallmark. Oh, that's sweet. That's what a good Jesus does. It's the pretty little lamb Jesus who holds whatever and have kids in his lap and is reading, I don't know, Chronicles of Narnia. I don't know. Like, that's the version of Jesus it feels like. And it's not that. It's that he comes and he does what other people should do. And he continues to model this in a gritty way over and over and over again. He resists that thing. And he continues to see people that other people didn't see. And he continues to sacrifice in ways that other people weren't. And when everyone else was lording their power and authority, Jesus continues to love and serve people. One of my favorite quotes is this one. It says, if you want to know how Jesus loved people, you look at what Jesus did. And what Jesus does over and over and over again is serve, and serve in miraculous and powerful ways. Now, years later, Jesus dies. We believe Jesus died. He rose from the grave and all of these things. And the early church is birthed. And then years after that, almost like a half generation removed from that, there's a guy writing about what it looks like to be a follower of the way, right? A follower of Jesus. And he's writing to a group of people who are just trying to work it out. I don't know how to say it better. They're just trying to work it out. Like, we have this sort of backing of our religion. We have all of these things tethered to it. We're trying to figure out what does it look like to be in the world and live in the world. And the guy who's writing this is a guy named Paul, extraordinarily educated dude who sort of like created all these churches over the ancient world. And he's writing to a group of people around what it looks like to live in this way. And here's what he says. He says, follow God's example, therefore, as dearly loved children, and then he says this, and walk in the way of love, or in action, take love. He says, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God, meaning this, that the model that we have from Jesus is laying down his life, laying down these things for us, being a servant, right? But then you get to this part, and this is the part that's, I think, so fun to talk about. Everybody agrees with this in the first part. But then what Paul does is Paul takes this idea and then begins to make very uncomfortable applications to relationships. And so there's this one passage in the midst of it that I heard taught when I was a kid. And as it gets taught, I'll just tell you, it's wildly uncomfortable, right? But in verse 22, you get this picture where Paul says this. Now, let me show you how far we're going to go on this. When it comes to your marriages, wives, submit to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. And I feel like when he said it, it's probably as silent as it is right now. Like, there's just a little bit of like, Paul, you're stupid. You know what I mean? There's a little bit of like, no, thank you. There's this part of this. And I grew up, I don't know if you grew up like this. I grew up in churches sometimes where people would teach this passage and they would teach this one verse. They didn't teach the whole passage. They would teach this one verse. And there would be men there like, yeah, submit, And I'm like, have any of you ever looked at your wife and just said that word? Like, how did that go? You know what I mean? Like, have you used that? Did that work? Like, I'm just going to need you to submit to me in this. And they're like, I don't know. There's a little bit of like, I don't know. Like, it just doesn't feel right. Like, there's a piece of, and I grew up in this, and what's so fascinating is if you read the entirety of the text, Paul is applying a principle to so many different kinds of relationships, and when he applies it here, it feels a little bit uncomfortable. But what Paul says before this actually lays out the full foundation that he's going to talk about, and it's so funny to me that, at least when I grew up, we didn't even read this verse. They'd read the whole thing, but not this verse. And this is always funny. The verse before this, here's what he says. He says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Well, who's one another? All of them. Yeah, but hold on. Me. Wait a minute. When you say one another, is it like the boss that doesn't know what he's doing? Submit? Like, okay. But like my spouse, submit? Okay, but now my in-laws. You know what I mean? Yeah, yeah. But who do they submit to? Well, this is for them too. They submit to you. Wait a minute. So, Paul, hold on. So it's if I submit, well, then who do they submit to? Well, they submit to you. But then who do I submit to? And it's it is a race to the bottom of submission. And I'll just be honest, I remember the first time somebody explained that to me, I was sitting in a Chick-fil-A, because of course I was. And I was sitting there, I literally looked at it, I was like, it's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And you go, how do you race to the bottom in submission to another person? And you know what? The relationships that are the healthiest in my life, ready, are the ones where I'm like asking how I can serve you, and then they ask how I can serve you, and then they ask how I can serve you. It just happens like this. What's funny about this in the New Testament is mutual submission between two people is like the operating system that all Christian relationships function on. And it's weird. You're like, wait a minute. But if I submit to my boss, yeah. But then he's going, hey, I'm also asking the same question, how can I help, and working to submit to the people that work with me. Yeah. So he's here. But then I do the same thing to my coworkers. And it's this like, well, when are we going to fight? Where's the tension? You know what I mean? Like, as I'm pursuing relationships, if I don't do the self-fulfillment thing and I choose to do self-denial, when do I ever get fulfilled? Like, if I'm constantly going, but how can I love you better? And how can I serve you better? If I constantly do that, then when do I get filled? What about me? This is the part this is me. But what about me? When do my needs get met? What about me? And this is where Paul's going, yep, that thing is what we're working on. But what about me? Didn't Jesus just constantly ask, but what? No. But he's sitting at the table when everybody could have washed his feet, or he could have picked one of them and said, why don't you wash all of our feet? No. Jesus picked up the towel. But then Jesus goes to the cross. Yeah. But then Jesus stood there as they're accusing him of things that weren't even true. And you're like, and he didn't even, I'd have picked up a lightning bolt, a little one, just a little, and just, shot collar kind of. I think that would have been fun, a little bit. Sorry, these are the things I think about as a Christian, like kid. Could I just what if he'd have just had one great phrase for Pontius Pilate? You know what I mean? Like, that would have just been fun. Just one, and we're done. But he doesn't. He lays down his life. They're chanting Barabbas. And he holds all the power, which I go all the violent power, sure. But I more go to the Office reference. Could he have shrewded him or something? Just make him look stupid or something. I would have been okay with that. Give your life, but take a little bit of power back. That's what he lays his life down. And it's not a race to the bottom in that you just, don't get anywhere. It is an acknowledgement of this in the New Testament, that everyone, and I'll explain the church thing for a second, the church being all those that are followers of Jesus, all of those throughout history who are followers of Jesus, submitting to Christ and submitting to Christ in this way. But then what about each other? And the New Testament principle is, well, when it comes to each other, it is a race to the bottom in submission. Now, let me give you an example. Here's an example. I love this question. Who loses? Who loses in a marriage when both people are working to lay down their desires and elevate the flourishing of the other person? Who loses? Nobody loses. No one. No one loses. Who loses in a friendship when both friends are like, no, I want what's best for you. No, I want what's best for you. No, I want to serve you. How can I help you? How can I help you? Who loses in that friendship? No, nobody loses in that friendship. Who loses in that relationship? Come on, you know this. If you're an empty nester and you have adult children, you know this. And that's always hard. It's always tense. It's always kind of weird. I get that. But who loses when a parent goes, how can I help? How can I help? How can I help? Come on, isn't that what you wish for those relationships anyway? We teach our kids this, or we're trying to. We've got Henry, who's 7, Eleanor, who's 5, and then Oliver, who's 2. And we're trying to teach Oliver. Now, Oliver's 2, so right now we're like, we keep telling him, I want you to think about sharing, this kind of stuff. And right now, he just only has one word, which is pummel, like pummel my siblings to get what I want, a little bit of this. But like we reward in our home when they are self-sacrificing for somebody else in the home, right? And it's hard. You'll watch. We have a switch. I don't know if you guys have switches in your house. Not light switches, but if you were thinking that, you're not going to get the joke anyway. The like a little video game Nintendo thing. And Henry, when he does it, he will give it to Eleanor, shaking, like, "Yep, don't break it," that. Like, and I laugh, going like, "Why? It matters, not because we want our kids to be good kids. I do. I want them to want to be around each other when they're 23, right?" And the only way that really happens is if they're united in not liking us, which we don't want that, or they've learned the discipline of self-sacrifice and self-denial. Now, come on, you know this. You've seen marriages where it's not a race to the bottom. It's like, well, what can I get from you? Or I'm not getting this need met, or da-da-da-da-da-da. And there are spaces to talk about that, for sure. But then you've seen marriages, and you know this, and it feels a little uncomfortable when you're with people, and it's like, well, how can I serve you? How can I serve you? Oh, I love you so much. And it's like, ugh. Like y'all are too sweet. You just want them to swear at each other once. I don't know, like just be mad a little bit. It's like, but they don't. And you're like, well, fight. Have you ever tried to pick a fight with somebody who felt too nice? You ever done that before? Like, and you know what they are? You know what they are? They have joy. They like to be around each other. Like, what is that thing? How can I serve you? How can I serve you? How can I love you? You've seen this with leaders? You know this? You've been around leaders who you just know there's a piece of it that they're in it for them. You know what I mean? You don't know how to say it. And you maybe not said it to them, but you're like, yeah, maybe a little bit of like, whatever that is. Your voice gets higher when you talk about them. Yeah, they're great. Whatever that is. And then you've been around leaders that you're just like, I need you to stop. Stop, sir. I need you to go do what you do. Right? One of the best leaders I've ever met, Steve Andrews at our last church. He's founding pastor there. And he would talk about all the ways that he failed. And I finally looked at him. There was a group of us, and he would come and he would serve. He would serve on guest services when he would come to our campus. He'd be the greeter guy. Nobody knew who he was. And he's like 6'5". He was a little bit hunched over. I mean, he's just like, and we called him Gimpy a lot of times because that's what his grandkids called him. He just had the grandfather thing about him, you know what I mean? But I'll never forget, I looked at him in a room full of all of them, some of our pastors. I was like, I want you to, I don't know, just like be a little bit of, I don't know what that is. Just be a little, like stop serving someone. And I'll never forget this. He looked confused. I'm like, I want to hear all your wins. He's like, he looked confused because it came so natural to him to serve and to put other people and to race to the bottom on behalf of other people. So my notes say this way for husbands in the room. Imagine if every husband led so well in their home that their wives emotionally wanted to be under their leadership, whether they were or not, but like they just like went, oh, I mean, yeah. If I were going to submit to anybody, man, it would be him. Why? Because he just keeps submitting to me. He's so fascinated by my own flourishing and what God's called me to do, and vice versa. Imagine this with your boss. Imagine this with your friend. If your closest friend were so preoccupied with your own flourishing, even when it conflicted with their own desires, I'll say that's hard. That's hard. It's hard to be in a friendship and go, this might cost me, but for your flourishing, I want that. And you go, that's painful. I give you also, imagine with kids, and I think about this a lot. Imagine if every middle schooler in our city that said that they were a follower of Jesus was preoccupied in middle school with serving other middle school kids. That feels foreign. That feels not right. That feels a little impossible. But this is what made the local church feel so irresistible. It wasn't the entity of it. It was the people in it who just kept going, you, no, you, no, how can I serve you? And when this is happening in the right way, it is the healthiest version of marriage, friendship, and family. And it's hard. So around this, I put like a couple of commitments in here this is what it looks like to do it. And then we're going to wrap up here in just a minute. But the 3 commitments are this. And when it comes to my own personal satisfaction, it's not my responsibility with other people in this way. I will submit my own satisfaction to Jesus. Your own future hopes and dreams will never be fully and finally satisfied by your spouse, by a friend, by a boss, by a job. It won't be. You either find that in him or you don't find it. It's just true. It's not that you can't be happy. You'll certainly be happy, and you can create a great life for yourself, but you'll never experience the centeredness and joy of finding satisfaction anywhere but him. This is what I think fuels the self-denial. I'm not looking for you to satisfy all of my needs because I trust him so much. I say when you get there, it's freeing to move through the world in that way. Those of you who are married, but I think this applies to all these relationships, is this. The second commitment is, I will lay myself down for my spouse's benefit, desires, and flourishing. Or you can say it this way as a leader, right? I will lay myself down for my team's benefit, desires, and flourishing. In a friendship, same sort of thing. Now, come on, don't miss this. When there is conflict and a beneficiary in the relationship, I commit to being the person to elevate you so that you can experience the benefit over myself. And come on, you know this. When you do that, something changes in the relationship. It changes in your tension. I talked to somebody after the first service. I love this. Like, well, what happens when we do this and it's so good and then we fight because we're fighting about how good we are to each other? I was like, I'm just going to tell you this. The night ends very differently when it's that fight versus another fight. Am I right? If you're married, like there's a little bit of like, it's just a better day. You know what I mean? Like there's something about that. You just go like, when we're fighting for each other's benefit, it's different. It's different in friendship and it's different in leadership. And so here's the question that I think everybody should be asking if you're a follower of Jesus. And this is the rhythm of it. This is how it fleshes itself out. And it's so simple. And it's this. Simple question is, I'm going to ask in response to you, how can I help you? How can I help you? What can I do for you? How can I help you? How can I help you? How can I help you? When you keep asking this question, I'll just tell you, it is hard. It is hard to be mad at somebody who's preoccupied with your own benefit. It's hard. It's hard to be mad at your spouse when they're preoccupied with your own human flourishing. It's hard. It can be done, but it's hard. It is hard to be in a friendship when the other friend is willing to lay down and deny themselves on your behalf for the betterment of you. It's hard. And what's great is this. This is what's so great about it. When you do this, and you found satisfaction not in everybody else, but in Jesus first, I'm just going to tell you, I don't know how it works. All the other stuff ends up coming. And you don't do it for that, but I'm just telling you, it does. When you're this kind of leader, influence just comes. It's just how it works. When you're this kind of spouse, health to the marriage, I don't know how, it just comes. When it's a race to the bottom, it ends up coming. And there's a part of you that goes, well, what happens if they take advantage of me? And you're like, they might sometimes, yeah. What happens if I get hurt? You probably will sometimes. God didn't call you to get to the end of your life unscathed or unbruised by a relationship. He's never called you that. He's called you just self-denial. Yes. It's like, oh, but what about? And all the whataboutism that keeps you from leaning in fully to this, I'm just going to tell you, ready? Is the part of you that has to die. All of the whataboutism in your leadership. He goes, well, what happens if they don't respect me, if all I do is ask how I can help? That's got to die. All the whataboutism has to die. And you go, if that dies, then where are my needs going to be fulfilled? And this is why if you're not a follower of Jesus, I would go, that's the gap. Because it's not going to ever come from everybody else. And it's not ever going to come from your success. And it's not ever going to come by whatever dollars in your bank account. It's never going to come from any of those things. It will only be fully and finally satisfied through him. And the only solution to the whataboutism that comes is trusting him. And so I'll tell you one like practical example around this, and then we're gonna wrap up. When Emily and I were engaged, we lived in Atlanta at the time. We had been together for a long time at that point, and we lived in different parts of the city. And I would drive like 45 minutes to work, and she would drive like an hour and a half to where she was going to downtown in the city. And we got to a point in our engagement where engagement's kind of hard anyway. You know, you're trying to figure all of it out, and you come to a point where it's like, I just want to be married. I kept saying, like, can we just elope and not tell anybody and then, like, have the party afterwards? She goes, if you ever call it a party again, I'll beat you up. I'm like, you're right. That's a good, just kidding. She was like, there's a piece that's like, can we just do that? And you get to this point, it was just stressful. And we didn't get to see each other very much because we were just doing this all the time. And so we decided that we were going to do a date and have a nice dinner once a week, which means that we would go to an ice cream shop and have dinner at an ice cream shop because it was cheap and we were broke, and you put gummy bears on the ice cream and it was great. And that was me, not her. So when we decided this, so we started doing it, and we were just going to talk about the relationship, and we were going to work on it. And I'll never forget during that time period, and I'm pretty sure it was her that came up with it, we started saying what we really need is to stop going, here's just all the stuff that I need. I knew that. She knew that. But what we needed to do is start saying, hey, as a rhythm of our relationship, we're just going to ask each other, how can I help? How can I help right now? What is one tangible thing I can do for you this week to help? How can I help? How can I help? How can I help? How can I help? And I'll just tell you this, and you know this in marriage, you can never ask that enough, and you also need to follow through. And what we also knew, and this is just me, I couldn't do 12 things, I couldn't do 20 things, but I could do one. I could do one. And so we got in this rhythm of saying we were going to ask each other, how can I help, as a rhythm to the relationship to prioritize this towel mentality. And they would be small things sometimes. Like at one point I asked her to design me thank you notes because of what I was doing. I couldn't get anybody to do it. I couldn't afford anybody to design them. That was my one tangible thing that week. I'm like a words of affirmation person in quality time. And one time I was like, hey, could I just have an hour to talk to you about, and we obviously talked a lot more than that, but like an hour to talk to you about this one thing. It's like, what's the thing we need to talk about? I was like, you affirming me. That'd be great. I'm just kidding. I'm needy. Anyway, so there's a little bit of that. I was like, hey, can we do that? What's the one thing that we could do? And I'll tell you how this worked, and this is so fascinating. The more we prioritize that rhythm, the more we were looking to serve the other person, and the more we naturally died to our own thing. And I'll just tell you this. It became this race to the bottom. And it gets more complicated. The more kids we've had, it gets harder to do that. We do this now, I feel like, in the minivan as we're driving to breakfast or something. Like we ask each other this. But it's a part of the culture and the rhythm of our relationship. And I'll just tell you this, for those of you who are married. When you do that, it changes the whole dynamic of the whole thing. And then for those of you who are husbands, let me just tell you this. This is between us. Don't tell anybody else. When you get the one tangible thing and then you do it, and then without her asking, you do another one, it's great. It's great. It's great. Everything's great. Everything's great. So I'm just going to tell you, you start looking, how can I tangibly serve you? Now, it changes the dynamics of the relationship. For those of you who are leaders, I'm going to tell you the exact same thing. Are you ready? I'll just tell you. Cheat code, GoldenEye cheat code for this. All right? If you want to lead people well, ask, how can I help you? It should be annoying to people how much people should be coming to you going, hey, look, you need to just go. So ask how you can help. Not to just garner influence, but so that you can lead people well. Your job is not just to be the leader. It's to be the chief servant of whatever it is that you're leading. That's what people want to follow. That's what you want to follow. That's who you need to become. And when you do that, are you ready? Everybody's more efficient. Everything gets better culturally. You lead better. And then the other part about this, you ready? Here's the triple cheat code. The people who aren't like that leave, which is even better for the whole thing, right? It forces them out. You deciding to pick up a towel and not sit in a tower changes the whole dynamic of all of it. So Here's what we're going to do. We did this last week. We're going to do it this week too. I'm going to ask you to think about this personally for just a second. But here's what I want you to do. I know it's kind of interesting or odd to do in a church, but I'm going to ask you just for a minute. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes for a second, bow your heads, and then confess your secret sin to the person next to you. I'm just kidding. Don't do that. That's not what I'm going to ask you to do. Just kidding. Close your eyes just for a second, bow your heads. What I want to ask you to do is this. I want you to think about the person that you're in a relationship with right now that you're having trouble doing this with. And for some of you, it's more than one person. Some of you, it's like 5 people, for some, for sure. But I want you to pick one. Just pick one. For some of you, it actually is your spouse, and that's okay. Like, own that. Yeah, it is your spouse. For me, it's a friend. There's tension in the friendship, and deep down, you're going, I don't know how to continue on in this friendship. That's okay too. Who's that friend? For some of you, it is the person leading you, and you're like, this is so hard with them. I don't even like them. Whatever that is, like you're thinking about that person. Whoever it is, I want you to get that person in your mind. And here's what I'm going to ask you to do. With their name in your mind, I'm going to ask you to pray a very simple prayer. And the prayer is this: God, give me the strength to see them the way that you do. And the second part of it is so simple. Give me the strength to serve them even when I don't want to. So, Father, all of us have a name or a series of names or a group of people where this is hard. But I ask for those of us who are followers of you that we would just realize and accept fully that it's not a negotiable part of being a Christian. This is what you've called us to do. And so, Father, I pray that you would help us to prioritize that. God, I pray that you would bring it to our mind to be people who ask this question of how can I help you? God, that you would lead us in that way. And in the moments where we resist the self-denial component, God, I pray that you would remind us what you did for us and let it be birthed out of that. And Father, I pray for the person in the room who's not a follower of you yet, and they're going, hey, I could apply this, but I'm trying to figure out how and what it looks like. And for the people who they have a list for, or there's deep tension with, or they're not sure what to do with, God, I pray that in the moments when they can't, or in the moments that they struggle the most, even if they don't believe in you yet, that they would pray the simple prayer of help me to do this, if you're up there. And in those moments that you would remind them of that prayer, and that tangibly you would show up on their behalf.